This video is going to be all about Intaglio dry point printing, otherwise known as etching, and we're also going to do some Chine-collé. So the first step is we need to edit our photo reference to use for our etching. So we're going to go to photopea.com, and this is a free editing site very similar to Photoshop. Some of you may be familiar with this. So first thing we need to do is we need to open up your photo file. So this should be on your desktop. And it should be a JPEG, a PNG, or something that's going to upload to the system. So this is my original photograph that I've taken. And the first thing that I want to do is I need to change the size of it to fit the plexiglass plate. So we're going to crop it to a fixed ratio with a width of 7 or height of 5. It could be reversed too if you want to have a vertical etching. And then I'm going to drag the bounding box to the position that I want it and click OK. So that ratio should fit as I print it to my plate. The next thing that we're going to do, I need to change the color to black and white. So I'm going to go to Image Adjustments, Black and White. And I don't like to mess too much with these options. I just hit OK. And then the next thing that I need to do is I need to flip my image. So I'm going to go to Image, Transform, Flip horizontally, because remember, in printmaking, everything that we do is printed backwards on the sheet of paper. The last thing that you can do is adjust the brightness and contrast, which is Image Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. And you want to have a lot of whites, but also deep dark colors, because that's really going to help you with the color choices as you are etching and to get some nice values in it. So you just play around with the brightness and the contrast to a point where you like it and hit OK. And then to save your image, we're going to go to File, Export As, JPEG. And then this is really important. You need to up the quality to 100% and then hit inches for the width and height. And remember to change it to either 7 or 5 depending on what your width is. So that will be the correct size that you will send to me in an email so I can print it off for you in class, or you can print it off at home. So that is editing your photo for the etching process. The next thing is we are going to use that photograph to practice on transparency paper. So I printed it off, and then I've taped my piece of transparency paper just over the top. As you can see, the image that I printed fits the plexiglass sheet that is in your kit provided by me. And this is just to help you practice with line making and etching before you get to the final plate, because once you start making marks on the plate, you obviously can't erase them. So the goal with these thin Sharpies or these micron markers is to sort of scratch or pretend that you are scratching into the plate. And you're going to fill up the entire transparency sheet, focusing on the amount of strokes that you make with your marker, and then different ways of cross-hatching or making marks on it. So as you can see, this is my finished transparency copy. I like to put a piece of white paper down underneath it to sort of see where my marks are compared to where the photograph is, and then make adjustments from there. So it is going to look more like a drawing. Obviously I've drawn this than a photograph, but it is very accurate to the photograph with the values and the mark making and the lines. So do your best to practice on the transparency sheet first. Now we are going to start etching on the plexiglass. So I've taken my plexiglass sheet. The first thing I do is I like to set up my station like this. So I have a cutting board with my photograph and my practice etching above it. So I'm going to use my photograph underneath my plate, and I need to peel off the plastic on both sides of my plate. So I put my plate directly on top of the photograph, and remember, it should fit. And then what I like to do is I like to tape one side of the plate just so it doesn't move in the process of me scratching and etching it. So I can lift it up like I did with the transparency sheet. So now I'm going to take my awl and start filling in the darkest parts of my image first with lots of scratches, lots of lines. Depending on how much detail you have, this could take the longest amount of time. So I take a black sheet of paper and I put it underneath my plate sometimes just to see how my marks are going. It might take longer depending on how much you have. So now here is my plate. It is all finished. I've gotten all the scratches, all the marks, and this is my printing station. So I need some water. I need some paper to put down for my ink. I'm going to start with my plate. And then I need to put on some gloves because the ink that we're going to work with is very oily and doesn't dry very quickly. So it does stain clothes and it does stain your hands. So you should have gloves in your kit. So this is the Akua ink. I'm going to start with black for my test print. And then I'm going to take specific brushes if you are in class. Obviously you have brushes in your kit. And mix it up first just to make sure all the oil is evenly spread out. Then on the side with the etching, I spread out all my Akua ink. And I want to cover every sort of scratch all the way to the edges. Now I'm not glopping the ink on, but I am pressing it into those marks to make sure that it sinks into my design and evenly spreading it out. The paper underneath obviously is going to help me with cleanup. Then you can take felt, or if the felt's not working for you, you can take old scraps of t-shirt, just a soft fabric, to wipe off the excess ink from your plate. So having a lot of paper underneath your surface is essential because it is going to get very messy. So you want to wipe it off until you think that there's nothing left on it. And it seems like, well, I want some ink on my plate, but the Akua ink is so oily and your paper is going to be soaking in the water that you're going to have more color than you actually think. So I didn't show you this before, but as you can see in my little water tray, I have two pieces of paper that are getting ready to print. So they are soaking while I am doing this. And you can kind of experiment with how long you want to soak the paper because sometimes soaking the paper could make things too dark or you could have a dry piece of paper that can make it very light. So your image should look something like this. You can still see some of the color, but you want to see the values show up on your plate. So if you have a printing press for your use, if you're in class, you put down your plate first with the ink side up. Then with clean hands, you want to go and grab your pieces of paper from the water and get a towel to then press and get off the excess moisture. So it'll still be wet, it'll still be open to absorb the ink, just not soaking wet. Then you're going to very carefully, handling the paper by the edges, trying not to get it dirty, put it directly on top of your plate, evenly spreading it out, trying to keep it even on the plate itself. And then if you are in a printing press, you're going to put over all the sheets and blankets and then roll it all the way through one way, just like that, and then open it up very carefully. Peel back the paper and your print should be there for you. Now remember, again, it is backwards from your plate, but this should be your test print. So what I like to do is, since my first print had ink on it, my plate, I like to see what will happen if I don't add any more ink. And I just roll it through the printing press with whatever's left over. Because sometimes a faded print or something lighter is okay. This is known as a ghost print since you're not adding any more ink. So see how it's a little bit lighter than the first one? A differentiation of color is nice. So in this section, we're going to talk more about playing around with different Akua inks. If you are a virtual learner, unfortunately, you don't have this option. But if you are in person, I have different kinds of inks that you can play with to get different color schemes. So it's okay if you just have black. That's not necessarily a problem, but if you want to take it to a new level or try to experiment with some gradients, this is a good choice. So for this part, I'm playing around with 4 different colors, and I wanted to kind of capture the colors in the picture that I chose, which was a lot of oranges and reds and some pinks. So the more colors you use, I'll tell you, the more you have to clean up, because I'm now using different brushes for each color, trying not to mix the brushes in between the colors and contaminate each case. And as you can see, I have gloves on doing this because, again, Akua inks are very messy and oily. But I'm mixing them up, making sure all the oil is evenly distributed. And then I start with the lightest color in my color scheme, which is yellow, and sort of paint in just the areas I want to have certain amounts of color. At this point, you could wipe it off and see, in different layers, but depending on what you're doing, if you want to just wipe it off all at once and see what happens, that's okay. You can be as meticulous and complex as you want to for this. I just like to put down the color and then make sure it's set into all of those marks. As you can see on my plate, there is some black left over. That is just going to happen. It does stain the inside of your plate, but I did wash it before I did this. And at the end of this video, I will show you how to wash and clean your plate properly in between printing. So then I put some red down, sort of buffed it into parts of the yellow, kind of blending it together. Being pretty general with the different colors and seeing what will happen. So as you can see, I'm going down the row in terms of what is lightest with my colors and then what is darkest. And I've just found that this helps not to lose those lighter colors, because if you start with a darker color and then you go in with a lighter color, it won't show up all the time. I put a little bit more yellow in the bottom just to make sure that I'm not losing that. And then I will print it as normal. So I'm taking off my gloves, opening up the press, pulling back the paper, and setting my plate with the ink side up very carefully, trying not to contaminate my fingers or get anything messy. So I've taken that other sheet of paper that I had soaking in the water, and then I pull back, and here is my color print. Just like that. So just a differentiation of color, showing more of what the original image would look like, or my interpretation of the original image. And as you can see, I've done many prints of this, all in black and now in color. The last part, this is for in-person students, so this is called Chine-collé. It is using a Japanese rice paper to then add different elements to your print. So the first thing is I have some Japanese rice paper here with different colors that I want to use. And then I'm thinking about shapes that would enhance or change my print to add something a little bit extra. So I'm taking a white charcoal pencil and then cutting out these shapes. The paper is very delicate and fine and easy to rip. So for this one, I'm just cutting it into the shape that I want it to be and then sort of fitting it on the plate, making sure it's the right size. But you can also, instead of using a scissors, rip these different pieces to kind of get a more organic shape. So I'm adding a little bit of the red into the petals of my flower. Again, enhancing the elements and principles, maybe some line, having sort of more of a focal point with that, that yellow circle, and playing around just with my composition. Obviously, it's going over the plate. That is okay. If you want to keep your pieces of paper just strictly on the plate itself, that's fine as well. But I wanted to have more of a playful image. So now this part can get a bit tricky. You are going to start with your plate and you are going to ink it up like we've been doing in the video before. So I wanted to keep it with just one color to see what would happen. So I chose this brown and I'm inking it up again, getting all the ink into all the different lines. I've already cleaned my plate so there's no color on it from before. And then I am again wiping off the ink, trying to keep all the lines with that ink, but I don't want all that residue left over because it's going to affect the rice paper. So then I place my plate on the printing press, and then I'm going to use this paste to then paint one side of my rice paper that's going to act like a glue and stick to the paper that I put on top of my plate. So this part again can get a little finicky, but I'm painting each of these just on the one side that I know it's going to stick to the paper. This glue will also dry transparent, so if it looks white at first, that is okay. So I will soak my paper a little bit less this time, but still trying to get the water, opening up those pores of the paper, putting it into the towel to dry it off, and then laying it very carefully on top of my composition and rolling it through the press as usual. Like so. So hopefully the glue from the paper, the rice paper, will stick to my printing paper. All right, so I'm very carefully pulling it up. And there is my image. So the ink is on top, showing all the details of the print itself. And then the rice paper is sticking to the back of the white paper. So Chine-collé is a little bit more abstracted, a little bit more playful, and you can do a lot with composition for it. Okay, so this is my other Chine-collé practicing, playing around with composition and color. For your class, again, this is just another way to change your prints and make them more unique. I liked the circle again, but I chose it to do it a little bit lighter. And now, the most important is cleaning your workspace and tools. So your brushes are filled with this aqua ink that needs a lot of soap and water and love and attention to get off. But your plate is also filled with it too. So you need to scrub your plate with a lot of soap and warm water, trying to get into the edges and all those lines that you made. So again, it's not going to come off entirely. You might see some staining, but try to wash it enough with soap and water so that your soap comes out white again, trying to get all that ink off. And then drying it with some paper towel, because you can reuse your plate as many times as you want to. I wash my brushes using gloves because they will stain your fingers, but you use a ton of soap. Dish soap is fine, with lukewarm water, and I'm rubbing my brush into the palm of my hand and my fingers, again waiting for the soap to come back out white again, and for my brush to look semi-normal. Your brush will probably be a little stained, but as long as it doesn't have the ink on it, it is still usable, and you know, it's not something that you're wasting. So here's my station all cleaned up. All the ink is there. I'm going to dump out my water, and you should have nothing left over for the rest of the class. All right, so that is printing, and I hope that you had fun and learn a lot.